Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this session by the Open Ethics series. We're going to get started just right now, actually. I'm very glad that so many of you have joined us. And to start off, I would have a quick look at what's at the slides. Tell you about the agenda before introducing the people here, including myself. So today we start with the opening. Right now, we have focus topics where each of our distinguished panelists will speak for about 10 minutes about a topic of their choice. They will introduce the topic themselves, all around the ethics around AI and privacy. And during the session, you can all ask questions through Slido. Those who are not familiar with Slido, you can go to sli.do and enter the ID 45633 and enter questions there. You can do this during the talks, but also after the talks. And after the talks, we'll address some of the questions that will be asked by you, and especially those that have received a lot of upvotes. So while you're in the meeting, also make sure that you upvote questions, and especially those that you want to see answered, of course. We will also have resources and networking on Discord. So you're all invited to join the Discord channel as a participant in this meeting. And you can use the QR code below here or the URL that you see on the screen right now. And there is a channel for the participants where you're invited to partake in the discussion and also in the discussion following these series. And if you're on Twitter, you can, of course, or on LinkedIn, you can use the hashtag OpenEthicsSeries. So once again, thank you so much for joining. And here's another link to our Discord chat channel. Don't forget to go there, and we'll pop this up every now and then while we're in the meeting, so you can have the opportunity to join Discord again, and also to ask more questions through Slido. Right. So first of all, welcome to our panelists, Vlad, Nikita, Luke, Björn, and I guess I'm not a panelist, but the moderator here. So to introduce myself, my name is Sylvain. I'm the managing partner at Tech GDPR, a boutique consultancy where we help technology companies, in particular in deep tech, using blockchain, AI, IoT, or similar technologies with the compliance to the GDPR and with privacy matters. But it's not about me today. It's about the four panelists that we have. But before I ask the different panelists to introduce themselves, I would like to introduce the co-founder or the founder of this series, Nikita Lukianets, to join us and to tell a little bit more about the Open Ethics series, of which today you see the first episode.
Hello, everyone. My name is Nikita. I'm very glad that so many of you have joined us today. I would like to kickstart this Open Ethics series and tell you a little bit about the purpose of why exactly we're organizing such series and what do we want to achieve. The main objective of the Open Ethics series is to help product owners and developers and privacy professionals to integrate ethical principles in the products that they're building, and specifically do it to build trust with their end users, to be able to disclose the way they're building their products, and therefore make it easy for the users to understand what can happen to them because of the decisions that your automated systems or your autonomous systems are making, and as well to follow the regulations that are now being put in place by many national and supranational structures. So Open Ethics is an open community, and the idea of Open Ethics is to build this transparency. And with series, we're going to start with privacy and AI intersection, but then this is going to be followed by other aspects that are needed and important in the way you're building your machine learning models and in the way you include users into your product development process and respect their rights. thank you again for joining us, and I'm giving the space for the other speakers to introduce themselves, and I will join later in introducing myself.
Thank you so much for introducing the speakers, the series, Nikita. My confusion, of course, is about, because we're now going to the panelists and ask every panelist to give a very short introduction about themselves, about a minute, before we dive into their specific topics. So first of all, I'd like to invite Vlad to join us and introduce himself.
Hi everyone, it's a pleasure for me to join Open Ethics today and speak about the intersection of privacy and artificial intelligence. I myself am a privacy enthusiast. I work as a privacy lawyer and legal networks manager at LegalNote, which is legal technology startup. And I also co-founded an NGO, which name is Privacy Hub, and the main purpose of which is advocating for stronger privacy and data protection in Ukraine. So I hope for a fruitful discussion tonight.
Thank you so much. Nikita, would you mind taking the floor again and introduce yourself to the webinar?
Sure. Thanks a lot. Thank you, Vlad. My name is Nikita Lukianets. I'm a technical director at Pocket Confident AI and a founder of Open Ethics. I have a degree in applied physics and then experience in computational neuroscience, basically where I've been building models for computer visions for microscopy and understanding how to construct neural networks that are similar to human neural networks in the brain. Well, we were doing this on the mouse, a biological model. In here, I'm mostly playing the role of uniting different experts in the field and helping them to share their experience. I have more than 15 years in human-computer interaction, and this very much contributes to the way I look at different technology aspects as well, including machine learning and artificial intelligence. And that's pretty it for 1 minute. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nikita, and also thank you so much for organizing this series. Next, I'd like to ask Luc to introduce himself.
Hello all, I'm Luc Danes. I'm a crypto consultant and trainer. So I focus on cryptography in organizations, and many crypto experts are focusing on the technical side of cryptography and diving deep into programming it or designing it mathematically. Although I'm helping various organizations like financial organizations, health, logistics, all kind of organizations with their questions around the use of cryptography to secure the confidentiality or the integrity of their data. I help them to make the right strategic decisions and to implement it in the organization, while supporting and coaching the more technical team members. And about artificial intelligence and machine learning and so on, it's all new for me. But I bring my experience with the various organizations with me, and I will introduce in a very high level what homomorphic encryption is later on. That's it for now.
Thank you so much, Luc, and I'm looking forward to learning about homomorphic encryption from you. Next, I'd like to ask Björn to introduce himself.
Hello, everyone. My name is Björn Dijkstra. Good evening from the Netherlands, where I'm based. I work for the National Office of Identity Data, which is a department within our Ministry of Internal Affairs. What I do, I help organizations such as now the National Office for Identity Data with risk management I draft policies, make risk analysis, and propose mitigating risk controls on a procedural or process level to a more technical levels. And I generally take a holistic approach where I involve privacy issues, ethical issues as well. So I'd like to think my risk management portfolio is complete that way. And I've helped huge multinational organizations to smaller startups with advice on risk management. So that's all for now.
Thank you so much for the introduction. And of course, for me as fellow Dutchman, I'm very happy to see two Dutch panelists on the panel today. Great. So I think we are ready for the first presentation, or the first 10-minute introduction to one of the subjects. And Vlad will be joining us to speak about Article 22 of the GDPR. And in particular, this is about automated decision making, and also how this relates to the GDPR. So Vlad, I'll leave it up to you for now.
Okay, let me share my presentation. Okay, hope everybody can see it right now. So the topic, okay, great. The topic I will be speaking tonight is the intersection of the European data protection regulations, mainly the GDPR, and the work of artificial intelligence. It's a pleasure for me again to speak about this topic, and I believe that it needs more attention from publicity, from various stakeholders, from government and from private companies. And for this, it's my respect to Nikita that he raises this topic and allows me to speak about this. So when I first tried to, let's say, find some funny picture or quote that will break the ice with the audience, I tried to find some pictures about Big Brother or some panopticon control of artificial intelligence, but I managed to find even something more interesting. And I figured out that some people believe in that by developing artificial intelligence, we try to summon in the demon. And it actually shows for me one of the extreme opinions about the artificial intelligence. First one is that artificial intelligence is completely out of control and completely out of accountability for us. And I think the opposite of this opinion is that artificial intelligence is far from here and is not yet developed to actually affect our lives. But I believe that today's situation is a bit different, and by showing how it is regulated on the European Union level, on the personal data protection level, I will show you that it is already regulated in a way. But first, let's understand how privacy is actually related to artificial intelligence. So to start with, privacy is about the respect to our private lives, and one of its key parts, one of parts of respect to privacy is actual personal data protection and control of our personal data. By personal data, we understand any information that relates to individuals, so it is not limited to some identifiers such as name or IP address or email address, but actually any parameters, any performance metrics, interests, etc., that tells something about our private lives, about our personalities. And some people might already recognize that a lot of algorithms, machine learning, and artificial intelligence in general is based on personal data, on data about individuals. Mainly, it can be data that is collected from individuals. It may be data that is observed through cameras or through online collection of data about individuals. and those can be inferences, so some conclusions about our abilities or analysis of our personal data that allows us to make some inferences. So when artificial intelligence, when algorithms works based on personal data, it implies that it will be regulated, the activity of the company that runs the algorithm will be regulated by personal data protection regulation, and in the European Union mainly by the kind of famous the GDPR. But then there are specific provisions within the GDPR that regulates automated decision making, which is based on personal data and produces legal or similar effects. So to be regulated by these specific provisions prescribed by Article 22 of the GDPR, the decision must be fully automated, so there must be no human involvement. It must be based on personal data, and the third part is that it must produce legal or similar effects. When we speak about legal effects, we usually refer to some judgments, some predictive policing, or for example, denial or making the automated decision on citizenship. So those will be legal effects. And when we talk about similar effects, those can be decisions on employment about individual, some economic benefits or work performance metrics traction. But also European regulators tend to agree that even some forms of aggressive marketing profiling can produce similar effects, similar to legal effects to person, because they can nudge people to make some economic decisions that otherwise they would not do. That's why, as we can see, a vast variety of algorithmic decision making can fall under the personal data protection regulation. And let's see how personal data protection regulation allows us to control this decision making. So first, when we talk about algorithms, the GDPR requires, by means of Article 13 and 14, requires algorithm to be transparent, and it requires them to be explainable. I must say that in the next series of open series, Nikita and other experts will tell a lot more about explainability, but in general, it implies two consequences. First, the algorithm that produces legal or similar effects to the individuals, it must be transparent in a way that individuals must be provided with general information of how this algorithm works and what principle it is based on. But then there is a specific information to be provided. For example, when the individual receives a certain decision for him, based on automated decision making, he or she is entitled to request information that will be specific to his case and explain the specific case why the algorithm, the artificial intelligence took this specific decision. Then Article 22.1 of the GDPR allows any individual to object against such automated decision making, and it will imply that in such a case, there must be a human, a responsible employee of the company that will make the decision instead of algorithm or in more general, a specific artificial intelligence. However, this article has some exemptions, such as, for example, when the decision making is based on the contract between the individual and the company, or based on the consent from the individual. It means that there will be no right to object against such a decision, because it implies that the individual already agreed to such decisions in for him or her. But in that case, there will be a trio of rights. So first, the individual will be able to obtain human intervention to see how the algorithm took the decision, then explain one's point of view to explain why the individual believes the decision was unfair or shouldn't be decided in this way, and last but not least, the individual can appeal against the decision. So as we can see, this trio of rights are not separate from each other, but must apply commutatively. So Nikita suggested that as an outcome, we should develop an actionable plan of how to apply these requirements into companies, organization level, or algorithmic level. So what I would suggest is to start with data processing impact assessment, which is basically a risk assessment in the field of privacy, to outline the main risks that can result from unfair automated decision making, unfair decisions made by artificial intelligence. Then there should be technical settings of such algorithms. Algorithms should not be affected by this black box problem, so they must be transparent and explainable. Then there must be a responsible person that will help individuals to assist them with regard to any decisions made by such algorithms that produce legal or similar effects. And of course, there must be a contact point for individuals to contact the company and obtain human intervention. To make this process systematic and to designate responsible persons, the whole process must be covered with appropriate internal policies that will describe roles and responsibilities for making sure the algorithm will be transparent and will be accountable. And last, as I described before, there must be a short privacy notice that for individuals, for data subjects, that will explain for them how the algorithms work and provide them with meaningful information, including logic involved in the automated decision making. That's it. Just a brief high-level overview of how this whole scheme works and how automated decision making can be held accountable from the perspective of both organization and data subjects who are individuals. So I will be happy to get connected with anyone and chat, discuss this issue, both by email or LinkedIn. And thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much for this input, Vlad. Before we go on to the next session, we have the opportunity to have a few questions, but only from the panelists. We take questions from the audience through Slido, which we'll do afterwards. Any of the panelists want to comment on this or have a question for Vlad?
Yeah, I have a question for Vlad regarding different privacy regulations. For example, California Privacy Act. So could you please bring some details whether, which you're aware of whether there are elements in CCPA that do regulate the intersection between privacy and automated decision making?
To my knowledge, there is no specific regulations on automated decision making to date in California and both in the United States. So I must say a few words about the United States, that they take a bit different approach on AI decision making, and they believe that this topic should be mainly regulated in a soft way, so by providing guidelines of think tanks and by self-regulation of companies and other organizations. But then there are certain data protection principles and that apply to artificial intelligence in companies that run artificial intelligence within their organizations. But there is no specific provisions on automated decision making.
Any other questions from the panel before we move on to the next talk? If so, I will probably throw a question at you, Vlad. So as a company, I don't always know what my AI algorithms do, yet there's this requirement to explain what my algorithms do to users, right? So how do I deal with that? Any suggestions?
So my first suggestion would be to actually analyze whether or not the decision for certain processing activity, for example, when some personal suggestions are made on the platform, or some contract is signed with the individual, to analyze whether or not there is a human intervention in this decision making, and if not, if the decision is fully automated, meaning that it is done only by algorithms that are in place with your organization, then I would consider whether or not those decisions are based on personal data, and whether or not they produce legal effects, such as those could be legal consequences for rights, freedoms, or obligations of the individuals, but also can be economic or social benefits. And if we have three answers, three positive answers, so there is no human intervention in this in the decision. The decision is based on personal data, and it produces legal or similar effects, then I would consider complying with Article 22 of the GDPR and take an actual risk assessment of what risk could be posed by such effects to individuals.
Perfect. Thank you so much for this explanation. I think it's time to move to the next presentation by Nikita. And while Nikita is getting set up with his presentation, I would like to remind everyone that we have Slido open. You can find the link in the chat. And this is the great place for everyone to ask questions to the panelists that we'll get into in a discussion format afterwards, after the 4 talks. And also, I see that almost 17 people have joined us already on Discord, and everyone is very much invited to join us on Discord and to join the channel, also to keep the discussion live afterwards and throughout the series that we have. So the link to Discord is also in the chat, and you're very much invited to join us there as well. Great, and then Nikita, I will leave it up to you to talk about human in the loop.
Thank you. So today I would like to, as a continuation of what Vlad has been talking about, I would like to talk about the principle, or a set of principles, that are called human in the loop, about how we can involve humans in within different configurations into improving how machines learn and how we control the outcomes that machines do. And what I'd like to do first is to talk about the main 4 stages of how the decision models are made. And it starts with perception. Basically, here we talk about what kind of information do we need and do we have to enable decision making. Then we talk about decisions. So how actually machines make decisions, what features do they use to make the decisions, what kind of algorithm they use. Once we do have a decision, we may talk about the action. So what do we actually do after the decision is made? Do we do a medical treatment? Do we launch a physical system to execute on decision? And then the 4th place is, how do we actually evaluate the quality of the decision, including the ethical domain? And there is one problem with this 4 stages, is that basically as soon as we discuss all of them, there is no AI in place, and it very much looked like this picture. So this is what I found out when I was looking for a way to demonstrate the process of what actually happens right now. So as you see here, a girl is trying to jump like a horse, and when we are setting our system, our autonomous system, in many cases, our system would probably act not better than we as humans have designed it to make. So what is the point? What do we actually have to do to make things work, to make things happen? This is where we need to make things better on perception, better on decision, better on action, and better in evaluation. This is where machine learning comes to place. As soon as we want to make any of those stages, we need to think about the improvement and feeding in the data, measuring the data loss, measuring the errors that we're making, or reinforcing the decision that the system is making. The problem in this case is that in majority of setups, labeling is a huge amount of work, and supervised machine learning depends on the data that subject matter experts annotate, right? So what we want to do actually is we want to find a way on how to improve that, and human in the loop system can do it in several different ways, and they could be applied in several different for several different purposes, such as making machine learning models more accurate, getting machine learnings to make a decision faster, making humans more accurate, or making humans more efficient in how they make decisions. So this is where we can use humans, not only in data labeling, but what today I would like to touch, and it's a very important important distinction in between two areas, is using human in the loop approach for improving machine learning, and using human in the loop in improving control. So what the privacy regulation is touching specifically is touching the way how we improve the control of the system. So how do we make sure that we focus on overall experience, user experience, and safety? And to talk about control, I want to just highlight several different configurations for which we can use human in the loop, which kind of human in the loop control designs we can use. Those of us who work in machine learning, who has ever trained a model, in majority of cases we used either a crowdsourcing or an expert for annotating the data. However, there are different kind of configurations how we can make the decisions. So this is about the configuration part. Apart from that, there are different ways we can add humans in the system. Specifically, we can use humans to either confirm the decision of machine, or using humans to advise the machine on how to make decision. Or we can use machines to confirm what humans are doing, or using machines to advise humans. So here there is a question of who provides the ground truth, who is providing the ultimate truth in our decision-making setup. Is it a human who does have a bias, as well as our training data, because it's coming from human, or it's a machine that for some reasons could have more specific or more accurate decision making. Next, what I would like to highlight is that it's very important for us to underline, to display and be transparent about what exactly human in the loop methodology is being used, and for that we're bringing it to our transparency protocol, where machines can share their schema with other machines. And we're also building a specific design design language so that humans can also understand what is behind and who is validating the decision. And the last thing that I want to underline and ask and highlight as a question, in the end, human in the loop setup doesn't remove ethical concerns. What it does, it shifts the responsibility, but it still allows the reassurance and two-way communication if it's needed, especially if we're taking a decision that are legally binding, and such as the ones that Vlad was referring to. At this point, I'm over with the presentation and open to answer questions from panelists. And of course, for everyone who's here, please feel free to drop me an email or connect on Twitter, or even to write on Discord. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nikita. And if there are any questions from the other panelists, then this is a great moment to ask them to Nikita.
Yeah, I would like to ask a question. So Nikita mentioned that currently we regulate how the decisions are made, mainly this human in the loop for control. But what do you think, should we regulate how the data is mined, how we mine the data for algorithms, how we build algorithms with human in the loop rules or regulations?
My personal view on this topic is that it's very difficult to regulate how data scientists are acquiring their data, because they could be acquired by any different methods. What is important is that we reach transparency in the way we disclose information about our systems. How did we collect? How have we collected this data? If developers and product owners will be disclosing the information, there is a way for us to do at least an audit and understand if what they're claiming is true or not. I think it's going to be a very very complex to regulate the data collection itself. But what is reasonable is to open the way and create tools so that everyone could be sharing information about how their system works without making their intellectual property damaged or disclosed in any way. So there are ways we can disclose more and build trust with the end users. I hope I answered the question, by the way, but I'm not sure.
Thank you. Yeah, great.
Are there any other questions from the panelists to be answered right now? I have
a question.
Please, Luke, go ahead.
At a certain point, you mentioned the human bias in decision making. And we also know that biases can be built into the machine models. Do you see a way that machine and human can help each other by indicating their biases from one side to the other?
So technically speaking, bias could be found when there is a mistake. So when there is a validation of the result. As if we are using our system on making decisions based on the data that is very similar to our training sets, most likely it's going to be very, very difficult to find out that there is a bias. While as soon as we have feedback loops either from the end users or from the validators that would see that the system is not applicable in this case, or that we reached an edge case, this is where we have an opportunity to locate the fact that the system is biased. Besides this, what we are able to do is also to regulate the decision space. Meaning, what we can do, we can make sure that our system doesn't make decisions that are unsafe, regardless of the data that is coming in, or regardless of how good the system is.
Thank you for the elaboration, Nikita. I think this is also a great time to move on to Luke, who asked the last question. Who will be talking about homomorphic encryption? And it's a slightly complicated subject, so I'm really interested to learn more about it and have Luke introducing it. And while we are at this, just a quick reminder that it's still possible to ask questions. There haven't been too many questions on Slido yet. I'd love to see more questions that our panel can then dive into after the 4 sessions. So Luke, the floor is all yours. But you may still be muted.
So this must be better.
Much better, thank you so much.
Okay, thanks Sylvan for the introduction, and you're right. Homomorphic encryption is a complex matter. I think encryption in general, using cryptography, is difficult and easy to do wrong, difficult to do right. I'm happy that Nikita asked me to give a brief introduction into this topic and how it relates to artificial intelligence. I have to mention here explicitly that I'm not a deep expert on the homomorphic encryption topic, but I have quite some expertise in helping organizations using cryptography, and I think this is beneficial for the talk because I won't throw a lot of technical details, but I try to find out and discuss what it is basically, and what the benefits may be, but also what pitfalls there are. So let's talk about homomorphic encryption. If we nowadays want to do any computation, we have to do it on our own site, or we outsource it to a cloud provider, or any party in general, but mainly cloud providers. Also for machine learning, cloud providers have a lot of tooling available that can be used, and such that you don't have to buy yourself your machines, but you can use their computation capacity. The problem, however, there is if you share data to the cloud provider, you can encrypt it. If you see the left side on the screen, you see the traditional outsourcing model. You can encrypt your data, then it moves encrypted to the cloud provider, but to use it, to analyze it, they have to decrypt it. They have to use the plain data to do all the computations on, and then send it back to you, the results. And the results may also be encrypted again for secure transportation, but still it's somewhere in the open. So we have a trust issue there basically with the computation provider. And so either you have to set up an agreement under GDPR that they can be trusted, or you just have to put a lot of trust in them, or you have to buy the computation power yourself. So the promise of using homomorphic encryption now is that it provides a way to let a third party do computations on data whilst still being encrypted. And I don't mean here that on the encrypted results, actually the computations are done. No, the computations are really done inside that black box, basically. The provider of computation cannot see inside what's happening, but he can solve the puzzle or the calculation for you. That for sure brings a lot of possibilities, and I have some use case examples collected. And for example, you can send private queries to a search engine, and the search engine doesn't know what you're searching for, doesn't know what results it will provide you, but only does know that it sends you the right encrypted results. Another big thing and big promise is on DNA pattern matching. You don't want to share your DNA with an external company. However, the external company can have a good model to predict certain diseases like Alzheimer, or to give you good advice on what diet or sports you have to do to keep in shape. Because it's now with homomorphic encryption in a black box and stays in a black box, you can certainly share your confidential information, having the benefits from both the model and the confidentiality on your data. So for machine learning, it has the same promise. You can certainly use machine learning tools available by or provided by a computation provider without dropping all your private data or business confidential data, or whatever reason you have, you don't want to share your data with them. And I think another very promising use case is that someone who has designed a model and sees that as business confidential. If you have a very good model, you don't want to share it with all your customers, like here it is, use it. But if a customer doesn't want to share the data from her own location, it's even possible to share the model in an encrypted way with the customer. The customer can do the encrypted computations, and you only have to provide at the end the decryption key to see the final results. So what's the current status of this homomorphic encryption? Its ID became known in about 1978, but only since 2009 there are IDs to make it practical. And since then, a lot of investments and time and big companies have been on it. You see some examples like IBM with their just released toolkit, Microsoft Seal, Google Private Join and Compute to find similarities in two data sets, and an open source project. Although it's still for limited use cases and it's still slow, and then I mean very, very slow. Although it's improving quicker than I think most cryptographers anticipated. So some warnings there. This idea sounds great, and I think it needs a lot of attention, and that if you do anything with machine learning, for example, keep a close eye on it. However, it's only available for a limited use case. It's not like you can use a remote encrypted computer. It has a lot of overhead. So the data and processing requirements are huge. And I think most important thing to mention here, because it's about ethics, this series, whatever your model is, cryptographic measures don't make it ethical at once, or doesn't solve all your privacy problems. I sometimes see in practice this misconception, like, okay, we have encrypted the data, so we don't have any privacy issue. So take care there. Keep in mind that your ID must be sound, and then can be performed better using this technique. So some advice to close with, because cryptography is difficult, please start with the simple solutions. This homomorphic encryption is very complicated, but if you don't do any password encryption, or password hashing basically, to store your users' passwords, or you don't have secured connections by using TLS, please start with that kind of measures before diving into the more advanced topics. Don't think you know crypto. I think that's an important one. Only use standard building blocks. Everyone who thinks he can write crypto makes mistakes. Even the best cryptographers build things and they break each other things, and then after years a standard rises out from that. So don't don't build it yourself, but pick, if you want to use anything, pick the standard building blocks, follow the guides that are with it, and know very well what it can do and what it can't do. On the right, you see some steps you can take, of you have to keep in mind if you are going to implement cryptography. So you have to start with the right requirements. And at the end, you have to be sure to verify if it really does what you do and to maintain it. And to end with, it's interesting, keep a close eye on it, but only try, don't try homomorphic encryption yet, or only try it if you think it's very interesting and you want to invest a lot of time and money into it. So that's it.
Luke, thank you so much for this interesting insight into homomorphic encryption. We'll take one or two questions from the panel. If there are anyone of the panel who wants to ask a question to Luke around the topic of homomorphic encryption. And if not, I actually have a question for you, which would be like, can we see homomorphic encryption anywhere in production already? Are we already that far? Is it in use in anything that you know of?
Good question, and I have to admit it was difficult to find. What I currently see is that it's a huge scientific discussion ongoing. That it's joined by a lot of big companies. I think for good reasons. It's very promising, but the use cases are limited, and we see several libraries out in the open to play with, and they seem to be quite sound. What I have seen is some pilot projects, basically to say, some tryouts. I've seen IBM doing some data analytics together with a bank on their banking data, that kind of projects. But it's not, and that's maybe important to say, it's not plug and play. At the end, what we all like to see, I think, is that you go to your cloud provider and tick a box somewhere, and you can just send your encrypted data, whatever it is, and it will be analyzed, and all tooling will be available as it is nowadays for unencrypted data.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so it's really something of the future as we see it.
Yeah, but it's going rapidly. It's going way faster than we were quite pessimistic in 2009. It was okay. We see a practical breakthrough, but this will take many years. But it's going faster than expected. Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. Perhaps I see that Vlad is unmuted. Did you have a question as well?
Yeah. So is it possible to take personal data from encrypted data sets using homomorphic encryption? Like to take some personal details about each particular person using homomorphic computations on encrypted data sets?
If it's well applied, then if you put your encrypted data from your from the consumer point of the service, then the service provider would not get any information out of it. It will be completely opaque for him. It's like a black box, and I think we saw that. I see my screen isn't shared anymore, but we saw that box with the gloves in it. It's like trying, you give in a closed box a puzzle to solve, and the only thing that the cloud provider can do is put the hands into the box, feeling the pieces of the puzzle, making the puzzle complete. But at the end, to see what picture is shown on the puzzle, it's only made visible by the consumer again when he opens the box up with his key.
Okay,
does it help?
I get it. Yeah, sure.
Great.
Luke, thank you so much for this interesting insight and for your answer to the questions. that also means that we go to our last presentation already by Björn Dijkstra. And perhaps I can just remind the audience again that it's still possible to ask questions on Slido. You find the link in the chat, and you're also more than welcome to join our Discord. The link is also in the chat. Björn, I'd be happy to leave the floor to you to talk about not homomorphic encryption, about privacy management for an agile environment, and also about how to include users in that, which is very, very important. So I'll leave it up to you.
Well, thank you for giving me the floor. Can you see my screen, my presentation?
That works perfectly. Yes. Good. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll be trying to answer the question on how to most effectively leverage privacy expertise with any form or format of organization, really, where there's a certain level or actually a very high level of uncertainty of the product or service being developed. And I've made a few assumptions, and I would just always like to make those clear. And we're free to discuss those later. So if those assumptions don't match yours, then we're free to discuss those later. But so the first one is you would want to leverage your resources with maximum effect. You would like to take a human-centered approach. You have an understanding of why privacy is of importance, and you will appreciate a few easy to implement and low-cost practices. So for any size of organization, be it a startup or a multinational, I think all the principles that I'll be giving you here should work for you. So independent of the framework, your project management framework you work with, the steps are the same, and they might be iterative, they might be waterfall based, but they're the same, and it might not be the same sequence in every sprint of iteration, but these are the basics. And I think Luc also mentioned them. So you mentioned requirements, design, implementation, verification, and maintenance. Maybe I have a slight different wording here, but you have your you need to define your privacy principles, your requirements. And you do a privacy risk assessment, which I've shortened here with PRA. So those are the blue squares in the process. So the top arrow could be a waterfall process, and the low one could be an iteration in an agile process. Then you need to develop it, you need to test it and deploy it. Then you launch it and validate it, or as Luc called it, you need to maintain it. So irrespective of which model you have, these steps you still need to do. I just want to make that clear. So privacy by design or privacy by redesign is a very important principle which I want to give to you. So where to start in the arrow? So as a startup or with a new initiative with a lot of uncertainty, when do you involve privacy expertise? So there's a gray zone, and I'll try to give the two extremes, and I'll try and find the middle ground for you. So you involve your privacy expert or expertise immediately after your idea has left a zone of high randomness or volatility, but when the idea still can be easily molded. So you'll want to have the requirements or have your project put on the right path very early on, right? So if you, for example, with respect to automated decision making, you want to have it right early on, because any later changes to mistakes you make are more expensive. I'll give you some examples of that later. So, and when you are in doubt, like, is it too early or am I too late? with involving the privacy expertise, it's always a good idea to err on the early side. So if when in doubt, basically just involve your a privacy expert. And this could be a 2-hour session, could be a 3-hour, 4-hour session. You don't immediately need to hire a privacy expert when you're still in such an early phase. So you could give a presentation of your idea and say, okay, my general outline is this. I want to go there. I think I need to process this kind of data for this purpose. I'm not entirely sure. What do you think? And you get immediate feedback. And that allows you to, without hiring a privacy expert full-time, to fine-tune your ideas. So, however, when the project is already underway, and this is where privacy by redesign comes into play, as soon as possible is simply as soon as possible. I cannot stress this enough. Mistakes have been made. People think they have the privacy expertise in-house already, but very often you don't. And you want to get a real expert in the house and reflect on your ideas and do this as early as possible. And why should you do this as early as possible? Well, because of the cost associated with fixing a problem in later stages. So if you're on the wrong path and you've already gone into that path and you need to go back, that's extra costly. So NASA has calculated in a requirements phase, there's a one cost unit. In later stages, like launching, etc., it's as much as 186 units. So it's like many times more expensive. Also, you'll be focusing on maximizing work not done. If you don't need to do the work, don't do it. And your privacy expert can help you with that. So then when you're ready to start your project, or before you launch your project, you have to define your principles. And your principles can feed how, for example, your software engineers need to do their work, what level of testing they need to implement. So if you have your principles ready, like, and this also relates to your risk appetite, you need to, we want a very high quality for our customers. You have to have strict testing. And if your software engineers know this, they can implement it themselves. So you give them the tools to know what needs to be done. So I want to give you a few other practical tips. First of all, I'd like to stress that you use what is available. Don't try and invent yourself, like the homomorphic encryption, perhaps. If you're in a larger organization, reuse what's already there. Do you have a privacy officer that already works for the organization? Get him or her involved. Don't build processes and policies, use what's available. If you need to do it yourself, try to build a blueprint for all teams. So processing steps. Don't write standards, don't write it out in detail. Just give them the tools to find it out themselves. And the same goes for your organization's privacy mission. If there's already an organization mission on a higher level, you can translate that into your privacy mission. And from there, you can find your principles. Also, look at other organizations you might admire and see what wording they use, how they communicate their privacy policy, and you can copy those. Within your own organization, you can also assign privacy champions. So you find a software engineer that already has a knack for privacy and give them a specific role. It doesn't replace a privacy expert. It's just an additional thing. And you can also assign a devil's advocate. And you have to look at the individual at a psychological level, see what roles he plays inside your team, inside your organization. It has to be a person that can do this kind of thing. And very often they're found obnoxious because we all want to be positive, etc. But if you assign someone that has that role, it might become acceptable. A question you could ask yourself is actually, would you sell your solution to your nearest family and friends? Would you be comfortable if their data becomes processed with what you're developing, your service. At any party, etc., you could ask family and friends, what would you expect this service to do? So expectations are very important in building this trust relationship. You can invite NGOs. They're very happy, especially with innovative artificial intelligence projects. So we often hear you're in the gray zone of compliance with regards to law, and they'd love to come by and give you feedback. So that's free feedback for you. And you can also create a user or customer panel. So you can hire a professional panel. You can create one yourself, perhaps, and then make sure there's diversity within your user and customer panel. So if it's an informal one, you're involving your family and friends, make sure you also involve your young cousin that's maybe in college and has different ideas from you. Finally, my final tip for you is to create a data register and data flow diagram from the outset. So whenever you're going astray or you don't get along with your privacy expert anymore, if you have a data register and data flow diagram, any privacy expert, information security expert, etc., can very quickly make an assessment of your current situation. And you have to start this from the outset because it's a hassle to start building this or creating such documentation once you're underway and doing lots of things. So start small and then build it bigger and bigger with each sprint. And finally, just a few links. Perhaps we're sharing this presentation with you. Privacy by redesign is not easy to find sometimes, so I've given you a link there. The economics of software engineering is actually the reasoning why you should involve privacy expertise in the earlier stages and not later when you're already on your way. And then there's some general ideas. And I want to pick out Cathy O'Neill's Weapons of Mass Destruction. It's a book, and it's from 2016, and it's an excellent book on seeing where artificial intelligence can go wrong, how it can become biased, etc., etc. So all the things that you might want to prevent yourself by getting privacy expertise into your organization on time. So thank you. That was my presentation, and I'm welcoming any question. I'm looking forward to any questions you might have.
Björn, thank you so much for this insight and also for sharing these great resources. I'm hoping that we can share these afterwards on Discord as well, if that's okay with you.
Absolutely.
I have a question. If the rest of the panel doesn't mind me kicking off, I'm actually curious because we as a consultancy deal with that quite a lot with developers and how developers are included in the process. What do you think developers can do themselves in lieu of just involving others? What can they do to build a better, more privacy-friendly product?
Oh, lots of things. So I think first of all, it's important that they have some awareness. If they're unknowingly incapable, they can't do very much on the privacy aspect. I think they have to have a baseline knowledge. And I think it's important to let them know that they too are responsible for privacy. It's not just a management level. It's not the privacy expert who's responsible. It's also the engineers. And you have to give them that feeling that they are responsible and give them the tooling and access to your privacy officer as well, or the privacy expert that you're hiring, and make it legitimate for them to discuss those kind of issues. Enable them, in other words.
That makes a lot of sense. Basically enabling them and making sure that they understand their position, perhaps, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. Any further questions from the panel for Björn?
Björn, I have a question. As a startup founder, how would you estimate the budget for a little AI company that want to put user privacy at first? So how do you come up with the idea of what might it cost to have a privacy, and probably what might it cost not to have a privacy?
So to start with the last question. So we're dealing in general with uncertain situations, risks that might be unknown. Companies have made mistakes. Companies have gone bankrupt because they've made huge mistakes. So the costs can be enormous. By coincidence, you could take all the right decisions, but that's very unlikely. As to the cost, it totally depends on the context. But just to give you still a practical answer, a few thousand euros could do the trick. So if you hire a proper professional from time to time that gives you feedback, you enable all your experts within your own organization, your own startup, the confidence that they too are responsible, that they can contact you on privacy issues if they have concerns. You involve your friends and family. You invite, for example, a privacy advocacy group for free. It could be a couple thousand euros to get very good advice, get good reports. I think it's very important to understand, in the end, the organization is responsible for the risks, not the privacy expert. It's your responsible to get the proper privacy expertise in-house. And the privacy expert is one of the people to go to, but there are other ways, such as just asking your cousin for some feedback as to what he or she might expect from your organization. And then, of course, it's for you important to understand what those risks are. So if you compare it to an iceberg, you might see the tip of the iceberg, and by involving all the other people, you get to see more and more what's underwater. And the privacy expert is one of those. Yeah, a couple of thousand euros might do the trick if it's not too complex. If it's what you're doing is very new, nobody else has done it, it will become more and more expensive, because also the privacy expert, if it's on the edge or in the gray zones of laws, there might not be a lot of jurisdiction, legal papers or advice from or white papers or university academic papers being published. So yeah, then it becomes more expensive and more risky as well. Is that, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah. Yes, thank you. I mean, you gave a bit of concretity here, so thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you again, Björn, for your insight. Before we move on to the questions from the audience, what we will be spending the last, perhaps, oh, this is not working. What we will be spending the last 20 minutes on. I'm not sure, can you see my screen actually? My computer gives all kind of errors right now. Yes, it works, okay. I just wanted to take the time to thank the panelists, Vlad, Nikita, Luc, Björn, for their very interesting insights today. And remind everyone that that we will have questions right now. So we funneled the questions through Slido. And the first thing that I would like to pick up is a question by David Lutz. And I'd like to ask Nikita about this. How can we talk about the AI ethics when so many people believe ethical truth is different for each of us, or there's no ethical truth at all?
Thank you, David, for this question, and it's nice to see you here in on this presentation, as we met on one of the panel on the conference on ethics in Lviv. So how I would like to address this aspect for artificial intelligence. It is true that what we talk about in multiple in multiple communities and in between us, ethics should be regarded within a certain community. How people used to make decisions, and what is accepted for them in terms of values, what is reasonable for them in terms of values, and what is not accepted. So good or bad exist within the certain ethical framework, And the stance that we're taking at this question, for example, in open ethics, is instead of talking about whether the decision is good or not good, rather to make sure that we are explicit about which ethical framework we're operating in. For example, privacy is one of the values that might be regarded as highly critical in some communities for some kind of data, but in some communities, privacy may not be that of importance. And therefore, the way we should talk about the privacy is not necessarily to enforce privacy with all possible way, but to make sure that the end users and the organizations that are working on their applications are very, very clear in about how they disclose it, whether they sell the data somewhere, whether they collect the data somehow. And privacy is one of such values in the hierarchy that might be important for some people. So this would be my answer, is to make sure first we're transparent about how we make our decisions and which kind of values do we include in our decision making and filtering of our decisions.
May I add something to that?
Please, I was just about to ask, please.
I'm sorry. So to add to Nikita's argument, I think transparency is also an important aspect. This is on the condition that there at least is a level of choice, but if you know what's being done to your data, I think that's very important. So yeah, there should be, for example, a notice of what's being done to your data. There should be a deliberation. So I would also advise companies to do some research in the market. So for example, including a panel, it could be informal or more formal panel, and then discuss of what's expected of your organization. So you don't expect a bank, for example, to sell your information to, say, a hospital, or vice versa. You don't expect those organizations to do that kind of thing. So your organization is people also have certain expectations of what you do, even if you're a startup. So yeah, and be transparent about it. Just let it know through your a notice on your main website how you deal with it, and what your policy is with regards to ethics, including privacy.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you for this. So let's have a look at the next question. How can I object to processing with AI of my data as a user? And perhaps we'll ask Vlad about this one.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I believe there are three ways to object to processing data with using automated decision making. A good one, a good way, bad way, and ugly one. So a good one is when the organization that uses automated decision making applies privacy by design principles and actually creates a dashboard. So some automated placed on the website or within the application or within the software that allows you to opt out from automated decision making by yourself, not using external help or not contacting the organization by any means. A rather bad one is when there is email address, so electronic way of communicating your concern or request to the organization. This could take up to 30 days, but nevertheless you will send electronically the request, and then the organization will stop using AI for decision making. But as you may notice, this will be not the best option, because this decision making can be very frequent and need to take immediate action from organization to stop the decision making. So it's not the best option. And an ugly one, I still believe that some organizations do not provide email addresses or online dashboards, but just physical address where you can address your request by sending a physical mail. I don't believe that this way will work in any way. And if you see that the only way of how you can object against AI-based decisions is to send a physical mail, then it should be some sign that the organization actually does not want people to object against automated decision making.
Perhaps further to that, normally when I send an access request of any kind, I just try to pick a way that is not listed on the website because they need to accept it through any channel anyway. And if they don't respond, I may just complain to the authorities, just to be testing them a little bit, right? Great. We have actually two questions around COVID-19, and I'd like to direct these to Luc. And perhaps we can integrate these into one kind of answer. So the first question: would you talk about the tensions between privacy concerns and tech-oriented efforts to stop COVID-19, especially how cryptography could be used in this case? And the other question, a little bit more concrete, perhaps: can homomorphic encryption help with COVID-19 contact tracing? Can you comment on that, Luc?
Okay. Yeah, I think these are nice questions. Thanks, Paula and Anonymous. Let's approach this from two different perspectives. I think that's important. We have the technical perspective and we have the ethical perspective. They are not completely separated. They touch upon each other. To start with the technical question, it depends on what kind of contact tracing you are thinking of when answering this question. Most people, I think, are thinking of the Bluetooth-based tracing using your mobile phones. What we see there is a big effort from Apple and Google to make a solid framework and to build it into their devices. Can homomorphic encryption be used there? Maybe, but I would advise against it because it's too much overhead. I think the situation where what's now being developed with the local computations using cryptography, but other kind of cryptography, is way more efficient than, for example, uploading encrypted data to this still very slow homomorphic encryption methods somewhere in the cloud. I was also thinking of it may be interesting for techniques where you want to see telecom providers sharing their data. That's very business sensitive, so they are really not willing to share their data just with each other to have it analyzed. They're also hesitant to share it because of privacy concerns and at the end, trust concerns in their companies. So to trust a third party sharing it's also a no-go. At least in the Netherlands, they have refused it. Maybe some cryptographic techniques like what Google has, the compute and join functionality, where you can see intersecting parts of data sets. Yes, maybe you can see there if an infected person has intersected locations with other people and then warn that other people when you retrieve that set back from the encrypted results. However, cell data is not accurate enough to see whether people have been close or just 2 kilometers apart. So it's a tough one to see what's the right technical approach there. But yeah, it may be interesting to be investigated by such telecom operators. That being said, then the ethical part, and I think it's very important with in this situation, but basically in every situation, and something I'm confronted with every day in my business practice is cryptography really the solution for your problem? Do you actually know what your problem is? Or do you think you just throw cryptography to it and then everything is being solved? And I will put in the show notes afterwards that will be distributed via Discord, I think, but Sylvan will confirm or redacted ID. I will share you a list of things to think about on COVID-19 contact tracing. And that certainly starts with, does it actually work? Yeah? Or do you need to have actually everybody using the solution, what will never be reached in practice? So why will you ever start? And what will be the, also an important one, what will be the misuse cases? Will this technology actually be used for contact tracing for COVID-19, or maybe to find the dissidents in your country? So that are, I think, the big ethical questions behind this.
Thank you, Luc, and I think it's very important to also put some question marks there, that we stay critical about what is actually happening, especially amongst privacy professionals that may have a little bit more insight in how data is being used. Thank you for bringing that up. There are 3 more questions that came in that I would like to address, and I'll probably just throw it out to the panel for very short answers so we don't run too much over time. To start with, what areas or industries do you think AI will always depend on human supervision? And which areas will machine learning validate human decision making? Any quick responses, quick comments on that?
I have a quick comment on this question. This always evolves. For example, a couple of years ago, there has been a publication in large scientific journal that was talking about a panel of doctors making 30% more mistakes on evaluating breast cancers. So most likely at some point, we're going to see machines that are helping humans in many areas. That's my short comment on this. I think it's evolving.
Thank you. And anyone else who wants to throw in a quick comment on this? Okay, then we just move on to the next one. Thank you so much, Nikita, for taking this one up, and thank you, Tatjana, for asking the question. Then we'll look at how does ethics relate to regulatory requirements. Do speakers see these as the same or two distinct areas of responsibility on part of a company? Anyone who wants to chip in on this?
I can drop a note on this. What I, maybe a side note, what I see in practice is that companies that have focus for either security or privacy and like to do their job well, at the end they have a lot less hassle with getting the regulatory compliance. For example, in the financial world, heavily regulated, but if the mindset is in we want to do it right, it's easier to get your, for example, PCI compliancy statement, as then it is just as a checklist you have to fulfill, but you don't want to.
Vlad, did you also want to comment? And I see Björn unmuting as well. Vlad first.
Yeah, so to some extent, the laws are ethics encoded, if you will. And you very often see an ethical discussion on new technologies, and at a later stage, a willingness to encode those discussions into laws. And for so yes, but you should still discuss ethics beyond regulation. So think beyond compliancy to law, if you will. So for any organization, the question is always, what can you do? So what is technically possible? And we could put man on the moon, etc. So my answer to that question is we can basically do anything. The other question, what is allowed? So this is the legal question. what are we allowed to do legally? But then the final question is, what do we want to do as an organization? So that's perhaps also the most difficult question, and that's where you have to understand your posture with regards to what you want to do for perhaps society, for your consumers, or your citizens, etc. So yeah, they're distinct, but they're also in each other's yeah. So I forget the English word here, I'm sorry, but it's like the extension. Ethics is the extension of law, if you will, and laws can also be more static. So while ethics change, you see that the laws might have been encoded decennia ago, and the technologies change, and the willingness of people also changes, as referring to what Nikita said. So couple of years, maybe even 10 years ago, we might have found it very strange. For example, there might have been breast cancer analysis using machine learning, and now we find it acceptable. And then very often on these kind of issues, we find that the law is getting behind.
Thank you. I think Vlad, you also had a comment on this, right?
Yeah, just to add on top of everything said, that I think the main distinction between ethics and regulatory environment requirements that ethics and ethical rules do not usually pose legal consequences on either individuals or organizations, but all regulatory requirements, especially in the area of human rights protection, have their basis in ethical behavior, and I would see ethics as more as a soft way of regulation of human behaviors, and regulatory requirements are the hard way to regulate with legal consequences and with actual penalties.
Thank you. Then let's go to the last question. At least I think we're taking one more question, right? So do you as a panel, does the panel believe or do we think it's possible to create technical guidelines for certain artificial intelligence use cases for when it fails? For example, if discrimination happens, and can we use something to zero that out? Any comments on this?
So I'll jump on this. So there are two questions in one. I'll answer first. That called, can we have some technical guidelines for certain AI when it fails? What we're seeing right now happening is more and more edge cases emerge, and what we're expecting to happen at some point is that we will see libraries or templates for failure models in software security and in software robustness. We have been talking about failure models and what the software should do if it fails to do what it's supposed to do. So what are the safe modes of functioning so that it doesn't harm anyone? And what I believe that this is going to come to machine learning application as well, so that we will have cases for the machine. What I also believe in is that while before we have been relying on what if cases with machine learning application today, we would be able to spot anomalies in how we are functioning in a much faster way, but we still require some learning and more information about what goes wrong. And of course, it's only possible with the user feedback.
Thank you. I think that would conclude the questions. We have a few more questions, but I think we unfortunately cannot answer everything. I think it's a good time to round off. Right, there are certainly a few things that I'd like to ask people's attention for. The first thing is again at the danger of sounding repetitive, to ask your attention for the Discord channel, where more resources will be shared. So thank you so much for joining. We had a lot of people joining already. The other thing that I'd like to draw your attention to is this series, right? So this was the first episode of a of the first season of the Open Ethics series. So the next editions or the next episodes will be on July 9th on Society, Democracy, Impact, AI Roles and Risks, and on July 30th on AI Fairness and Non-Discrimination. And I'm sure that many of them will follow. Nikita, do you want to add something to that about the series?
So, as you have already said, we have the series, and the topics of the series are going to be outlined more or less the same way it happened this time. What I probably want to mention is that the series on the 9th of July will probably be shifted to the US daylight time zone, so that we can have more people from the other part of the world participate in the series, and Europeans would be also encouraged to join. So we will see what would be the best setup for it.
Great, thank you so much. And I believe this episode will also be shared on YouTube, I presume, or some other channel.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay,
so we're going to share all the links in Discord, and obviously everyone who was registered for this series is going to be invited to the next one by email.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Then I'd like to thank again the panel for their interesting insights and answering the questions as well. And of course, all the attendees that join. We're quite happy with the amount of attendees that were here today, with the questions that we got, and also the interactivity. So we hope to see you back at the next edition. And once again, thank you so much, and have a good evening or day or wherever you are, whatever it is. Thank you so much for joining, and thanks again to the panel.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Well, thank you. Have a good day, everyone.